Warbirds over Scone has been growing steadily in recent years to become the biggest warbird airshow in the southern hemisphere, and one of the world's great vintage aviation spectacles. Every 2 years, this small town in the rural Hunter Valley region becomes the focal point for Australian aviation enthusiasts, attracting 15,000 visitors to an area of just 5,000 residents. There's little wonder that people flock here from across the country and, increasingly, from abroad. This show has become famous for its large formations, with up to 13 aircraft flying at once. This year's event featured a 5-ship display of Mustangs, a quartet of Kittyhawks, and a trio of Wirraways, gatherings that are almost unprecedented at an Australian airshow. And there were many other aircraft present as well, including the last flying Hudson and Paul Bennet's relatively newly acquired Sea Fury and Vampire, as well as a 3-ship display of naval warbirds that included the world's only airworthy F4U-1D Corsair, a TBM Avenger, and S2 Tracker. Two of the most memorable displays of the weekend came from more modern aircraft, though both still bona fide warbirds. Klaus Plaza flew this ex-German Air Force Transall, and former test pilot Steve Becker put this PC-9 through a gripping and very low-level aerobatic routine. In this short programme, we'll recap a few key highlights. You can find a longer 2-hour version of this programme on the PlanesTV streaming service. Held on the 28th and 29th of March 2026, the latest edition of Warbirds over Scone was very possibly the best yet in this show's long and storied history. Australia's first Warbird airshow was held at Scone in 1984, organised by Paul Pay, a pioneer of the Australian vintage aviation movement. Today, the Pay family is still very much involved, but this year the show is under new management, with Paul Bennet Airshows taking the helm. As well as running the show, Paul Bennet Airshows also provide many of the aircraft and displays that take part. Here, Paul himself is opening the show in his Wolf Pitts Pro. Here, a formation of monoplane training aircraft used by the Royal Australian Air Force over the years. In the lead, a Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation CA-3 Wirraway. On either side of the formation, 2 Pacific Aircraft Corporation CT-4 air trainers, and in the slot position, a Pilatus PC-9A in the colours of Australia's national aerobatic team, the Rollettes, which flew the PC-9 from 1989 until 2018. Next, a solo display by the PC-9. This was a remarkable performance, which started with a low side-slipping pass down the runway. At the controls is former Royal Australian Air Force PC-9 test pilot Steve Becker. In Australian service, the PC-9 supported 103 pilot training courses and was flown by 1,400 trainee pilots through to the type's retirement in 2019. After retirement, Australian PC-9s were sold onto the private market. This one is owned by Doug Hamilton and it's based at Wangaratta. Next came one of the highlights of the show, a formation of Mustangs of a size almost unprecedented at an Australian event. Organisers had hoped for a 6-ship of Mustangs in the flying display. Instead, we got 5 in the air, plus 3 more on the ground, perhaps the largest preservation-era gathering of Mustangs ever seen in Australia. The Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation began building P-51 Mustangs from kits during the Second World War, designated the CA-17 Mustang Mark XX. Production was slow, and only 17 had entered service before the war ended. A total of 80 CA-17 Mustangs were built from a planned total of 690. Post-war, the company built a small number of Mustangs from scratch, and these were designated the CA-18. That included 40 Packard Merlin-powered Mark 21s, 14 Packard-powered reconnaissance Mustangs known as the Mark 22, and 60 Rolls-Royce Merlin-powered examples known as the Mark 23. The last CAC Mustangs were retired in 1960, replaced by the de Havilland Vampire. After the three CA-18s had landed, one of the P-51s headed to the hold to join up with the PC-9, and the other conducted a solo display. This is Cameron Smith in The Flying Undertaker. It was built for the US Air Force in 1945 and later served with the Indonesian Air Force. It was then recovered from Indonesia to Australia in the 1980s and took to the air again in 1999. The Flying Undertaker paint scheme is a tribute to an F-6D, a photo reconnaissance version of the Mustang flown by Major William A. Shomo. Next, it was the turn of Dove of Peace, which performed a formation aerobatic routine of the highest quality alongside the PC-9. After the Mustangs, another exceptional formation. This time an S2G Tracker, TBM-3E Avenger and F4U-1D Corsair. After a few formation passes, all three performed solo routines. The Corsair, owned and flown by Paul Bennet, was first up. This is the only F4U-1D Corsair flying anywhere in the world. Next to display was the TBM-3E Avenger, also owned by Paul Bennet, but displayed by Matt Henderson. The S2G Tracker in this display was flown by Alex Lemerton and is based at Shell Harbour as part of the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society. The Society is perhaps the world's leading operator of vintage multi-engine aeroplanes, flying types such as the P-3 Orion, Super Constellation and Lockheed Neptune. A fairly recent addition to the Paul Bennet Airshows stable, this is an ex-Iraqi Air Force Fury now configured as a Sea Fury FB-11. Paul himself was at the controls. Its fickle 2,480 horsepower Bristol Centaurus engine, famously difficult to operate in civil ownership, was replaced with a huge 3,050 horsepower Curtiss-Wright R3350. While the gathering of Mustangs attracted much attention, there was a similarly significant gathering of CAC Wirraways, with no fewer than 3 examples taking part in the show. This was probably the biggest Wirraway formation seen at any airshow since 1999. Based on the North American NA-16, a precursor of the T-6, the Wirraway was built as a trainer, but it was also pressed into service as an emergency fighter and ground attack aircraft when Japan joined the Second World War. Warbirds over Scone 2026 managed to equal the post-war Southern Hemisphere record for the biggest formation of P-40 Kittyhawks, a record set at Scone 4 years previously. Taking part were Judy Pay's Taiab-based P-40F, flown by Gerard Lappin, Ross Pay's Scone-based P-40E, flown by Stephen Death, Alan Arthur in his P-40N from East Albury, and the Caboolture-based P-40N flown by Darcy O'Connor. Two of the P-40s performed solo displays, a different one on each day. Here is Gerard Lappin in the Merlin engine P-40F. Most P-40s were powered by the Allison V1710 engine, but the P-40F was one of 2 Warhawk variants to be fitted with a Packard-built Merlin for improved performance. Today there are just 2 Merlin engine P-40s left flying, the other being a converted P-40E, which makes this the only genuine P-40F flying anywhere in the world. The latest aircraft to join Paul Bennet's fleet is this de Havilland Vampire T-55, and once again Paul himself is at the controls. He took delivery of this aircraft in 2025 and it is based here at Scone. It was then the turn of the Spitfires. The show had hoped to feature 5 Spitfires in the flying display, in Australia's biggest ever post-war gathering of the type. Sadly, for various reasons outside the show's control, only 2 were able to participate in the flying display, a pair of Mark 8s. Nonetheless, this is a significant reunion. These 2 Spitfire 8s were shipped to Australia together and became stablemates at the Sydney Technical College in the early post-war era. They've since been restored to flight, but are not known to have flown together until now. The biggest aircraft to display at Warbirds over Scone was this Transall C-160, flown by famed Warbird display pilot and former German Air Force Transall pilot Klaus Plaza. Like its pilot, this aircraft is also ex-German Air Force, but it's now one of 3 owned by McDermott Aviation, used for aerial firefighting. Like several other Australian airshows, Warbirds over Scone was closed with a balbo, featuring a grand total of 13 aircraft on this occasion. Taking part, the 100 Squadron Hudson, Paul Bennet's Avenger and Corsair, the 2 Spitfire Mark 8s, 100 Squadron's CA-18 Mustang Mark 23, Doug Hamilton's P-51D, and the 2 CA-18 Mustang Mark 21s, as well as all 4 of the P-40 Kittyhawks. The Hudson and Avenger broke off after the first pass, leaving the more nimble fighters to come past the crowd several further times. There aren't many places where you can see a Warbird balbo on this scale, and it was a memorable end to a terrific show. A show which featured many mixed formations and rare types that cannot be seen outside Australia. It was also a show where the quality of flying was consistent and remarkably high. The Australian warbird scene is on an upswing at the moment, and Scone in particular looks to have an exciting few years ahead. This event, which is already among the very best for vintage aviation enthusiasts, could very well grow further and gain increasing international recognition in the years to come. You can see much more of all these displays, plus several others that weren't featured in this short programme, in an extended 2-hour report from Warbirds over Scone, available on the PlanesTV streaming service.